Hawaii is a U.S. state or a nation which successor was the Republic of Hawaii, or is the government of Hawaii the monarchy called the Hawaiian Kingdom that existed before 1893. There are a lot of people with a lot of opinions on this topic. However, we are going to base the answers in this documentary on the thesis and presentations given by Dr. David Sai. David Sai is the self-proclaimed chairman of the Hawaiian Kingdom according to www.hawaiiankingdom.org, and is involved in several real estate title disputes and criminal legal matters regarding this information that he presented to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, The Hague, regarding this case, Larsen versus the Hawaiian Kingdom, in the year 2000. This documentary is written and compiled by Ryan Thompson. Ryan Thompson is not a professional historian or political scientist. This video will give references to the sources in the description. You are encouraged to do your own research. Even if Ryan Thompson was a professional in these matters, everyone has bias and no one should accept received information at face value. If you are interested in forming an educated thought on these topics, always dig deeper and do your own research. Ryan runs a blog and radio show at www.disruptarian.com, and more information and interviews regarding this topic can be found there. Mahalo.
This is ThinkTech Hawaii. Community matters here.
Good morning, everybody. Aloha. My name is Mark Shklov. I am the host of ThinkTech Hawaii's Law Across the Sea program. Today our program is titled Larsen versus Hawaiian Kingdom. And my guest is David Keanu Sai. Keanu, as we call him, Keanu Sai has a Ph.D. in political science and teaches at Windward Community College. Quite a few years ago, Keanu represented the Hawaiian Kingdom as its agent before the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, in the Netherlands, in a case involving claims by a citizen of Hawaii named Lance Larsen. Mr. Larsen claimed that the Hawaiian government had been negligent by allowing American laws to be imposed in the Hawaiian Kingdom. This is an interesting case. It went to arbitration in The Hague. We'll ask about the results. We'll discuss the case, its background, its history, its meaning, its ramifications, and current status. Recent events will bring this case to the forefront soon. First of all, aloha, good morning. Keanu, good to see you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, my pleasure, my pleasure. Now, I need to ask you, Hawaiian Kingdom. I thought we were the state of Hawaii. And before that, a territory, and before that, maybe a republic or a provisional government. So, Keanu, you're going to have to explain to me, well, is there a Hawaiian Kingdom? Is there a Hawaiian government? What's the difference? Please.
Okay, well, that's a good question. I thought the same thing as you before.
Okay.
Well, when I'm speaking about the Hawaiian Kingdom, so let me give it some personal context.
Okay.
My great-grandparents, so my tutu's parents, on both mother and father's side, were born in the 1880s. In the 1880s, this place here in Hawaii was called the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I'm referring to that country called the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Okay.
Now, in order to explain why I say the kingdom still exists today, that's not a sovereignty proposition. It's not an aspiration. What I'm speaking to is the legality and the facts that the country, the Hawaiian Kingdom, still exists. So in 1893, the Hawaiian Kingdom was actually one of 44 independent states in what was known as the Family of Nations. Okay, only 44. Today, there's 193. Actually, 195 if you don't include those that are members of the UN, such as Kosovo and Rarotonga.
So in 1893, Hawaii was its own country, its own nation, its own government. Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
It had treaties with all the European powers,
Okay.
including the United States. By 1893, it had over 90 embassies and consulates all over the world.
Wow.
It was a constitutional system, very progressive, and by 1864, it adopted the separation of powers doctrine.
Okay, so in the annotations of the video, I have mentioned the Republic of Hawaii and how David Sai, in this interview and most of his presentations, he skips over that. Now, if you go to disruptarian.com/recognition, you can go to this page, these pages that I've set up showing these letters of recognition from 20 countries in 11 languages on 4 continents, recognizing the Kingdom of Hawaii as a legitimate successor of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Now, why does that matter? It's because David Sai goes from the Hawaiian Kingdom to the U.S. annexation of Hawaii. He skips the in-between parts. He skips, usually, the 1887 Bayonet Constitution, where native-born Hawaiians, whether they were indigenous or Caucasian, they were both, rose up against their kingdom, their government, and insisted that King Kalaluka, and I always butcher these names, but the king at the time, stopped spending money lavishly that the kingdom didn't have. In fact, the U.S. inherited $15 million of debt that the Hawaiian Kingdom had when they annexed them. That they stopped trying to override the legislature. They continued to try to make racial voting a thing, and they did, in fact, succeed in that, preventing Japanese people, genetic Japanese people, whether they were born in Hawaii or not, from voting.
Fast forward several decades later, in 1887, you have another shift in the Constitution, and that Constitution is often called the Bayonet Constitution.
Right.
At the time, Kalakaua is now the sovereign in the islands, and based upon a meeting he had with an individual who I'll talk about a little bit more, Sanford Dole, he is convinced, some say by violence, that he needs to enact this new constitution. So he creates this Constitution of 1887. And what that constitution does is it essentially pulls power away from the monarch. The monarch essentially becomes a figurehead in the kingdom government, and instead puts power into the legislature, to the people, and power into the cabinet of the sovereign. A cabinet of whom is selected by the legislature and no longer selected by the monarch. So that's sort of leading up. In 1891, Kalakaua dies, and his body is shipped back to Hawaii, to Honolulu Harbor. They see the black sails, they know something's wrong, they find out he's passed. Almost immediately, his heir, his sister, Liliuokalani, is whisked away and asked to take an oath to the 1887 Constitution. And at the behest of her husband, who was then the governor, John Dominus, governor of Oahu, John Dominus, she takes an oath on the 1887 Constitution. And she did not like the 1887 Constitution for the same reasons that her brother did, but she didn't feel sort of handcuffed like her brother did. So she was ready to propose a new constitution. She did a circuit tour. So this led all the way up to January 14th, 1893, which starts sort of this 4-day saga in the overthrow. What happens on that day is it's the last day of the legislative session. Liliuokalani leaves her home at Iolani Palace by horse-drawn carriage. If we pull up the next image, we can see that she's carried over kahili bearers, royal guard, the Royal Hawaiian Band is playing, and she goes into the legislative hall, which is Liliuokalani Hale, which is the current home of the Hawaii Supreme Court, and she prorogues the legislature, essentially saying, I close the legislature. Officially, we're going to close the legislature, which was sort of a normal occurrence at the end of, sort of like sine die for our legislators now. After that, she went back home across the street to Iolani Palace, and she had a plan. And her plan was to announce that she was going to promulgate amendments to the Constitution, the 1887 Bayonet Constitution. And those amendments essentially would restore monarchical power. It would take away the ability of the cabinet members to sort of veto what she was doing. And she went and approached her cabinet and said, are you folks going to countersign? Can someone please countersign this to make it an official act of the government?
So she was telling them what she's up to.
She told them, you know, here's the new constitution. I've heard my people. And the legislature before that tried to have a constitutional convention. It was voted down because you needed 2/3, and they didn't have that yet in the legislature. So she was taking the tact of Kamehameha V and saying, I'm going to promulgate a new constitution. I do want my cabinet members to countersign. Little did she know that her cabinet members were had that morning talked with some of the business interests in Hawaii at the time who were very powerful and influential, and they had a lot of reservations, to put it lightly, about this move in promulgating a new constitution, specifically because it would restore power to the queen, but it would also affect their business interests. Mm-hmm. So she then, because the cabinet was not supportive, she went out to this crowd that had gathered and said, you know what, folks, this is not the time. We will have a more appropriate time, and we'll do it the right way, get the legislature involved to amend this constitution.
So she knew the wind was not blowing in her direction at this point, from her cabinet at least.
Correct, correct. So what she ended up doing was retreating back, and that night, that action of proposing a new constitution provided what's often called the Committee of Safety. They called themselves the Committee of Safety, who were pro-annexation to the United States individuals, a lot of whom were descendants of missionaries that initially came to Hawaii. They met that night, and they used this as a way to say, our plan is now to end the monarchy.
And that's what Queen Liliuokalani was doing when the overthrow happened, is that she was trying to push through a new constitution that allowed only genetic Hawaiians to vote. And that's when the provisional government, the Committee of Safety, rose up and overthrew the government. Now, if you look at people like Sai Phd, Dole, and the others that rose up, they were born in Hawaii. Their grandparents were born in Hawaii. These people were, native Hawaiian. The word native itself means a place where you were born. So these were native Hawaiians, Hawaiian Kingdom subjects, rising up against their own government, like has happened all over the world in many other places. And he'll eventually mention Germany and Prussia. This happened there as well, where, Germany annexed Prussia. So you'll see that, all of these countries, he mentioned Switzerland and the Geneva Convention. They sent letters of recognition on September 11th, 1894, recognizing the Republic of Hawaii as the legitimate successor of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Spain, Russia, Portugal, Peru, Sweden, Norway. Here's the Netherlands. He talks about the Hague Convention by, let me just see here. These files are so big, I've got them in their original size and format and pixels, so it takes a long time to load, so it probably won't load right away. But I've given links where you can download these right from the State Archive, and Ken Conklin is the one responsible for retrieving these from the State Archive. So let me just say, November 2nd, 1894, this is when Queen Emma of the Kingdom of the Netherlands personally signed a 2-page letter dated November 2nd, 1894 to President Sai Phd Dole, recognizing the Republic of Hawaii. So all of these letters of recognition, all of these allies of the Kingdom of Hawaii transferred their treaties from the Kingdom of Hawaii to the Republic of Hawaii, and that's why they sent these very important letters of recognition, so that the treaties they already had formed stood up still in this new government in the Republic of Hawaii. So all of these recognize the Republic of Hawaii. It's very important, and I don't know why he skips that. He's very intellectually dishonest for not mentioning these things.
Which was quite amazing, given the timeline of Hawaii's constitutional evolution, which began in 1840. Now we're just talking 24 years later. Mm-hmm. So that country itself, as it adopted the separation of powers doctrine, in 1893, Queen Liliuokalani was the executive monarch.
Okay, so you had an executive, you had a legislature, I assume is what you're saying, and,
exactly.
And a judicial.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in international law, as it existed at that time, as it exists now, the country itself, the Hawaiian Kingdom, was referred to as a state, an independent and sovereign state. Now, the term independence is a political term. It means the laws that exist over Hawaii is exclusively only administered over Hawaiian territory, independent of other laws that may be administered over other territories, such as the United States, Mexico, and so forth. So when anybody comes into the Hawaiian Kingdom, they are subject to Hawaiian Kingdom law.
Okay.
Okay. Now, let me compare that to Japan at the same time. Japan did not have independence. Its independence was not recognized, nor did China. These were non-European powers. They were states, but they weren't independent. They were the subject of unequal treaties. So like in Japan, if an American citizen gets into trouble in Japan, let's say in 1880, he could only be prosecuted under American law through the American consulate, called consular jurisdiction. The same applied in China as well. Siam, Persia, Ottoman Turks. Did you know the Hawaiian Kingdom had an unequal treaty with Japan that if any Hawaiian subject got into trouble in Japan, let's say in 1880, he could only be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law by the Hawaiian consulate through consular jurisdiction.
No, I didn't know that.
So they were clearly a member of the family of nations.
Okay, they bought into that regime too.
Now again, he keeps skipping back and forth, but he is once again skipping this idea of the Republic of Hawaii that was recognized by all of the Hawaiian Kingdom's treaty holders and allies. So he should be mentioning this about this point, but he's not. And then when we talk about annexation, he talks about how there was no treaty. So there's no annexation because there was no treaty. There was a treaty in 1898, and I've got that on my website as well. And that treaty was passed by joint resolution, which has every bit of the effect of any other law passed by Congress. It has to be passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the President, which it was. So that treaty, which was welcomed by the Republic of Hawaii, Sanford B. Dole asked for annexation. The Newlands Resolution was passed by joint resolution passed on July 4th, 1898. So another celebration for us in Hawaii for Independence Day. But it was passed just like, any bill was passed, amendment to the Constitution was passed. It was fully legal in every way, passed by the Senate, passed by the House, and then sent to the President to be signed. So it was passed by all three of those, bodies of government in the United States, and it was requested by Sanford B. Dole, the President of the Republic of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, it was the Hawaiian Kingdom that was the first to recognize Japan's full independence. Queen Liliuokalani, January 18th, 1893, where the Hawaiian Kingdom rescinded consular jurisdiction, thereby subjecting Hawaiian subjects to the full scope and application of Japanese law.
Okay, interesting.
So that kind of gives you a sense of what the Hawaiian Kingdom was at that time, where my great-grandparents lived in.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was a system. Now, international law separates the government, which is the physical apparatus that exercises the sovereignty of the state. So the Hawaiian Kingdom in international law is the state. The government is its physical apparatus that exercises that authority.
Okay.
Why that is so important is international law recognizes that the state would still exist if its government was militarily overthrown.
All right.
Another fact of history that David Sai fails to mention in this interview, and most all of his presentations, is the Morgan Report. He will talk about James Blount, who came to Hawaii at the request of Liliuokalani's personal friend Grover Cleveland to restore the kingdom. Blount did interviews, but not under oath, and not notarized. He just took informal statements, which when Senator John T. Morgan was sent out to investigate, he took sworn testimonies, meaning failure to tell the truth would result in perjury charges, a felony, and the same witnesses that James Blount claimed to interview gave sworn statements that the statements that James Blount recorded in his report were false, and that they did not make those statements. History books will say about James H. Blount. Blount was a prominent spokesman for white supremacy, and strongly opposed adding a new non-white element to the American population. Read the Ignored by Dr. Sai Morgan Report at www.morganreport.org.
That's important.
You can't erase the state just because somebody comes in, takes over the physical bodies, the physical government.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, a contemporary example today would be Iraq in 2003. The Iraqi government was overthrown through shock and awe. Everybody saw it on CNN. But the overthrow of the Iraqi government did not equate to the overthrow of Iraq as a state. International law still recognized Iraq's existence because Iraq is the subject of international law, whereas the government is a subject of its domestic law, whether it's constitutional, absolute, combination, or whatever you have might be the case.
Okay, so how would you change? How do you get rid of the state?
You have to merge, right? So within international law, there are two types of states: original states, successor states. Okay. Now, a successor state is one that separates itself from another state. So that would be the American Revolution, they're British colonies, but in 1783, King George III, through the Treaty of Paris, recognized the 13 former colonies as 13 independent states in a confederation, a loose union of independent states. So that's called secession, and that is where the United States became the successor state of Great Britain.
Okay, so why do you say the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists today? Why do you say it's still a state?
What was done in 1893 was the overthrow of the Hawaiian government, illegal, as concluded by President Grover Cleveland.
You mean when
in his
those
investigation.
Marines came off the boat?
January 16th, Marines landed, assisted in the overthrow of the Hawaiian government, which President Cleveland investigated through James Blount, who was the special commissioner to investigate.
Anyone who reads both the Blount Report and the Morgan Report must weigh their relative credibility. If the two documents and the circumstances whereby they were created were presented to an impartial jury, then by the standards used in today's courts, the Morgan Report would easily win. The Blount Report was written by one man with the aid of one stenographer. Testimony was taken in secret without any oath to tell the truth and without any cross-examination. There is strong circumstantial evidence that Blount was sent to Honolulu by President Cleveland specifically for the twin purposes of destabilizing the Dole government and of writing a one-sided report to be used as justification for Cleveland's efforts to restore the Queen and block annexation. In Honolulu, Blount lived at a hotel that was a hotbed of royalist activity. Blount took formal statements mostly from royalists and actively twisted or falsely reported what some annexationists told him, as proven by their sworn testimony in the Morgan Report regarding how Blount had treated them. The Morgan Report was produced by a committee of the United States Senate with plenty of personnel and resources. Testimony was taken in open session. Live witnesses presented testimony under oath and were subjected to cross-examination, while those who did not appear in person sent affidavits sworn under oath in Honolulu. A nearly even mix of Republicans and Democrats on the committee and in the Senate ensured that conflicting views would be debated and witnesses would be vigorously cross-examined. Certainly, President Cleveland, a staunch supporter of the Queen, had every opportunity to ensure witnesses sympathetic to Blount's version of the events gave testimony. Yet no royalist came to be cross-examined. Perhaps Cleveland thought Blount's report was evidence enough, but when subjected to further analysis and additional testimony, it was found sorely lacking. Credit to www.morganreport.org.
And concluded that, his words specifically, by an act of war, the government of a friendly and confiding people has been overthrown. Now, from an international law standpoint, once a head of state makes the statement by an act of war, he just triggered state of war. Okay. So in international relations, you have both state of war, state of peace. The purpose, the goal is to stay in a state of peace, but you could go into a state of war through an act of war, and that's when humanitarian law is activated. In order to transform that situation back to a state of peace, you need a treaty of peace.
And we have no treaty.
We have no treaty of peace.
And the state has not become a successor state.
Right.
And so you're saying there has been no change to the state.
Right.
I see. Okay. So, all right. I understand that proposition. Now, how about Larsen? What is Larsen versus the Kingdom of Hawaii? What is that about?
So, given this background, this context of the state still existing, no government, state of war, right? Humanitarian law allows for a principle to be used called the principle of necessity. Now, the principle of necessity is really the mother of all inventions. And a lot of things during the military is based on necessity, but also during occupations, as well as what is called governments in exile. So when a state has its government illegally, or not illegally, but its government overthrown, irrespective of whether illegal or legal, you could create a government in exile to represent the state. And that's what happened with Belgium. And when King Leopold was captured by the Germans, Belgians fled to London, formed a government in exile.
That's right.
But what they do is they represent the state because their mandate did not come from the people. There's no elections during occupations. That's called necessity, the doctrine of necessity.
I see.
When I was in the Army, a private can become a lieutenant in time of war. He assumes the chain of command. It's not his choice. It's actually his duty in order to maintain the command structure. But he's just an acting lieutenant until a properly commissioned officer comes and he gets relieved, goes back down being a private.
Okay.
That same principle applies at the international level.
All right.
So in 1995, I had come to this realization that Hawaii is not a part of the United States. Its government was illegally overthrown, never reinstated.
So the government was taken over, the mechanical aspects of the government are taken over, but nothing changed with regards to the state. So that's the difference.
And that's the cornerstone
I see.
of everything. So the key is, where did the state go, not where is the government?
Okay.
You know, so if that state still exists, which I found that it did in 1995, we took steps to reinstate the government as it stood in 1893, similar to a government in exile, but we did it instead a government in situ, which is within the territory.
Okay.
Okay. So that's what we did.
All right.
Yeah. Now,
And when you say we, who are we talking about?
there's certain individuals that were part of this. I purposely not share exactly who they are because it can get a bit contentious. You might say from my experience, people don't take this information quite well, but I can take the attacks.
You're involved.
You might say I run point, just like a military, I run point.
Okay.
But I can assure you there's more people involved in that just me.
All right. So Larsen has a claim based upon the fact that the state still exists, the government apparatus does not of the kingdom. What, is that right, or explain?
Okay, so let me back up as to how did Larsen come to make this claim.
Okay.
Because Lance Larsen is just a regular person who's an electrician who lives on the island of Hawaii. He's not an academic. He's not a lawyer. He's just a person who is, he's a good man. But how did he get to that point? So the government that was formed, which is called the Provisional Government of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the acting government by necessity, it operates on three aspects of its mandate. Because it's not representing the people, but rather representing the state through its legal system by necessity. Its first purpose is to expose the occupation. Second purpose is to ensure compliance to humanitarian law, which is the law of occupation. And then third, to finally provide for an effective transition to a permanent government when the occupation ends. And that's pretty much what governments in exile do. It's just we're here in the country. I was on the Big Island back, I would say 1997, and I gave a presentation about Hawaii being occupied and that people need to follow the laws. In particular, Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code, as it stood in 1893, specifically states that the laws are obligatory upon all persons, whether subjects of this kingdom or citizens or subjects of any foreign state while within the limits of this kingdom. Lance Larsen heard this, understood the presentation, and he decided to test it.
So you're saying even though the state doesn't exist, the laws of the state remain in force?
No, the state exists and the laws exist, but the government may have been overthrown, and we're just the acting government exposing it.
All right, got it.
Yeah. So the legal system is basically what is independent within this state called the Hawaiian Kingdom. So it's Hawaiian Kingdom law. It's the civil code, the criminal code, the constitutional law, common law. Those are the laws that I'm speaking to, which is the legal order of the Hawaiian state.
Okay, so the state exists,
right?
State remains, its laws remain in effect. Okay, the government apparatus is gone.
Right.
Okay, I'm beginning to get there.
Right.
Beginning to understand, but we're going to have to take a break right now, and then when we come back, you're going to have to go into the Larsen claim. Okay?
Not a problem.
All right, so we'll be back in a minute.
All right. Good.
Welcome back. My name is Mark Shklov, and I am the host of ThinkTech Hawaii's Law Across the Sea. And today we are here with Keanu Sai, talking about Larsen versus Hawaiian Kingdom. And we've got to the point where Mr. Larsen heard Keanu talking about the fact that the state, the Hawaiian Kingdom state, still exists. Its laws still exist, even though the apparatus, the government may have been taken over, not exist. And he heard Keanu talk, and Keanu, what happened then? What happened then?
So when Lance Larsen was in the audience, there are other people there. I not only explained why you need to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law, not just because it's the law of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code, but also as to the reason why we're in this place today. Okay, so in 1893, when the government was illegally overthrown by the United States military, they naturally carried, as a consequence of that act, a responsibility. And their responsibility, which was customary international law at that time, which was later codified in the Hague Convention, was the occupier, the one who overthrew the government, was mandated to administer the laws of the occupied state. No different than in Iraq. So in Iraq, when the government was overthrown, they established the Coalition Provisional Authority to administer Iraqi law during the Iraqi occupation. They were not administering American law.
Oh, okay.
So this was the presentation, not just Hawaiian Kingdom law.
Okay, so we got to follow the law.
Got to follow the law.
And the state of the kingdom still exists. Got to follow that law.
And
okay.
I knew the problem of following the law, but my job, being a member of the acting government, was to expose and to present that law.
Okay, so what was Mr. Larsen's?
So Mr. Larsen, upon his own self, took it upon himself to look into the law. He found out that there was no law that regulates driver's licenses.
Okay.
Because 1893, there were no automobiles.
There was no law of the kingdom.
No law of the kingdom.
Okay.
There are American laws, but American laws remain in America.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So he decided to test this
Okay.
out, and he went to his truck. He lives on the east side of Hawaii Island, and he took off his license plate. His license plates, took off his registration, safety stickers, and so forth. And he put a big placard on the back of his truck that restated Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code.
Okay.
The laws are obligatory. And then he started to drive around Hilo, and he
Okay.
got a lot of tickets.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I guess that would happen, yeah. Okay.
He went to court. He was represented by Ninia Parks, an attorney.
Okay.
And his argument was he cannot follow American law, Hawaii Revised statutes dealing with driver's license, because this is the Hawaiian Kingdom.
And the Hawaiian Kingdom laws still control.
Exactly.
I see.
And that if he does follow American law, he would be committing treason against the Hawaiian Kingdom. That was his argument. So Judge Sandra Schutte was a judge, presiding judge. So I was actually called in by his attorney to serve as an expert witness. So I was qualified as an expert witness through Judge Schutte, and I explained there's no treaty. And that a joint resolution of annexation, which the U.S. Congress enacted in 1898, supposedly annexing Hawaii, really didn't annex anything. Because the United States could no more pass a law annexing Hawaii than it could pass a law today annexing Canada, right? There's still no treaty. So that's when Judge Sandra Schutte made a decision, fined him $900. And I was there, I watched this whole thing. And she asked him, are you going to pay this? And he said, no. If I pay it, I'm committing treason against my country. So she ordered him to be locked up for 30 days, 7 days solitary confinement. Now, from an international law standpoint, what you got right there is an unfair trial, which is a war crime under Article 147 of the Geneva Convention. And you also have unlawful confinement, another war crime. And then when he was forced to pay his fine in order for him to be released, now that's pillaging. So his attorney was very concerned for her client who was being put in prison. I think she was concerned for his safety. And this was kind of outrageous to her, 30 days, 7 days solitary confinement. That's kind of going overboard. So she didn't know what was going to happen behind the scenes. So she was very concerned. She turned to me and she says, the provisional government, the acting government, is liable because you're supposed to be protecting my client from the unlawful imposition of American laws that put her client into this predicament.
Okay.
And an arbitration agreement was eventually agreed upon, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration received it in November of 1999 from Lance Larsen's counsel, who's the moving party against the Hawaiian Kingdom being the defendant or the respondent.
And you went there, and there was an arbitration.
Yep.
And what happened on the arbitration?
Well, the first thing the Permanent Court of Arbitration had to do was to verify whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists as a state in order to fulfill its institutional jurisdiction to form the tribunal. They did. They verified it. So hearings were held in December of 2000. We eventually won the case, the Hawaiian Kingdom, because Lance Larsen was not able to come after the acting government on negligence without the United States being a party called an indispensable third party.
And why did they have to have the United States? I mean, I can understand that logically, but what's the principle? Or
So there are two precedent cases in international court cases, Monetary Gold and East Timor. These dealt with an indispensable third state is necessary for a moving state to proceed against defendants. Okay, so they have their play is somewhere in the substance of the decision. The rule is a tribunal cannot review the conduct of a state unless that state is present in the proceedings.
In order to defend itself or to make some sort of a presentation.
Because there's no subpoena powers at the international level.
And at this arbitration in The Hague, the question involved the United States. And was the United States invited to be a participant? And
Yes.
what happened?
Yes, actually, before the tribunal was formed, I was contacted by the Secretary General of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, Secretary General Van den Hout. He's a Dutch national. And when he spoke to me on the phone, now he's speaking to me as the defendant. I'm representing the defense in this case. We're not the moving party, but we're the government. And he told me his specific words. He said that the registry cannot find any evidence that the Hawaiian Kingdom does not exist. You notice he didn't say that the Hawaiian Kingdom is still recognized, because you're looking at the subject.
Yeah.
And that he also acknowledged that the Hawaiian-Dutch treaty was not canceled, because we're in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So then he says, and I say his specific words, he said, in order to maintain the integrity of this case, he highly recommended that the Hawaiian government, with Lance Larsen's attorney, provide a formal invitation to the United States to join in the arbitration.
Okay.
So on March 3rd, I traveled to Washington, D.C.
March 3rd, what year?
2000.
Okay.
We had a meeting with John Crook from the U.S. State Department, with Nina Parks, the attorney for Lance Larsen, and he was given an official invitation to join in the arbitration. You might say I'm calling the bluff. If you can prove that the Hawaiian Kingdom doesn't exist, step into an international tribunal. We'll renegotiate an arbitration agreement for you to prove that. He began to quickly watch his P's and Q's, because I told him that our conversation would be reduced to writing and sent to the court for the record. That very next week, I get a call from the Deputy Secretary General, Phyllis Hamilton, who's an American. She tells me that the American Embassy in The Hague notified the court that they're not accepting the invitation to join in the arbitration, but they asked permission from the Hawaiian government and Lance Larsen to have access to all records, pleadings, and transcripts.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
That's called explicit recognition of the Hawaiian government, its existence. But it's also not denying the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state. If Hawaii was the 50th state, they would have proved it, but it's an American law that took Hawaii to begin with, which didn't affect Hawaii under international
So they
law.
didn't choose to challenge the fact that
No.
the state of Hawaii still exists. Or I'm sorry, that the state of the kingdom still exists.
Exactly, because there's no evidence that it was extinguished.
Okay.
So that's when, that very next month in April, was when the tribunal was formed. And that eventually led to the hearings in December after pleadings were submitted before the oral hearings.
Okay. In the few minutes we have left, I'd like you to tell me what happened at that arbitration and what's happening now.
So the tribunal stated that because of the indispensable third party rule, they cannot rule on whether or not Lance Larsen's rights were violated during his trial
Right.
and incarceration if the United States is not participating. So the Hawaiian Kingdom won the case. Okay, we prevailed.
Okay.
Now, the tribunal also left open in the award, arbitral award, fact-finding. An international commission of inquiry could get around the indispensable third party rule, because the International Commission of Inquiry under the Permanent Court of Arbitration serves similar to a grand jury, where they look into the facts and they assign responsibility to those facts, criminal, possible criminal or civil. It's like a combination of Special Counsel Mueller with the grand jury together. That's what an International Commission of Inquiry is.
Okay.
That International Commission of Inquiry, we entered into an agreement with Lance Larsen on January 19, 2017. Two of the commissioners have already been selected these past 2 days, waiting for the third commissioner, which could be a judge for the International Criminal Court. And the first sitting will be here in Hawaii for the Commission of Inquiry on January 16th and 17th, marking the 125th year of the invasion and illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian government and its occupation.
When the Marines came on shore. Okay. So what are they going to be charged with finding? What are they going to determine? What is this commission, this fact-finding commission, going to do?
Three things. First, what is the role and function of the Hawaiian government within the framework of international humanitarian law, the laws of war and occupation? Second, what is the duty and obligation of the Hawaiian government toward Lance Larsen, and by extension to all Hawaiian subjects within Hawaii and resident abroad? And third, what is the duty and obligation of the Hawaiian government toward protected persons, resident within Hawaii, and those that are transient? So protected persons is, in humanitarian laws, identification of non-Hawaiian subjects and non-American citizens. So let's say a French national here. That person under humanitarian law is called a protected person. And the laws of occupation also protect that individual. So those are the three areas that the commission will be reporting. But they will have to look at who's responsible for the unlawful imposition of American law here. And then look at what is our role. Because within an occupied state, you have a duality of legal systems, the occupied and the occupier. We're in this position because the occupier did not conform and comply with international humanitarian law.
Okay, so the United States is still not a party to this.
Yep, because it's like a grand jury.
Okay.
They're just looking at the facts, assign responsibility, but it'll be up to, if they issue what could be called indictments, it will be up to other governments throughout the world to prosecute for war crimes under what is called universal jurisdiction, or the International Criminal Court, or whoever the commission feels or recommends that can handle this type of situation. Our goal here is not to exacerbate the problem. Our goal here is to address the problem, have a procedure that is set and recognized, and move toward compliance. We need to ensure that international law is complied with. That's the goal. We're now dealing with the fact that it hasn't been complied with for over 125 years. Well, coming up to 125 years. So it's a hard pill to swallow, but I can assure you it's real. And people just need to be educated on this, and we're here to fix the problem.
And we're coming up in January to a hearing or a fact-finding commission, and so we're going to hear more about this in the future.
Absolutely.
Keanu, I want to thank you very much for being here today and telling us about this very interesting case and what is going to happen in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Mahalo.
Well, that video was from September of 2017, I believe. It is now August 9th of 2019. There was no fact-finding commission, and he says that only states can enter into this International Court of Arbitration. That is untrue. Businesses, corporations, this is a chamber of commerce, the International Chamber of Commerce. This isn't a, state-only commission, or state-only court. This is for anybody. He's full of it.